welcome to all of you for being here. This catwalk style thing is actually quite tempting. But I'll stay here because I need to see most of you. By the way, don't blame the organizers for this. They did say smart casual, but I thought this was casual, but obviously not very smart. So anyway, this actually is an indication for something I will want to talk to you about at the end of this, because honestly, a big part of what sometimes prevents us from innovating is actually how we think, how we see things. Ready to get inside and see some of the secrets? Yeah? Okay, let's put the slides on. So very quickly, how many of you, I'll talk about 5 charts, 5 technologies and 1 big mission. How many of you have ever used one of this? Show of hands, please. Okay, remember those? You had to dial things, and if you had a friend that had 4 zeros in his number, you just drop them. It's like, I don't want to deal with this guy anymore, right? And we actually have used this in one lifetime. I don't know if you've seen the video that was released recently about Google Assistant. So take a look at this. On one side is a computer, and on the other side is a human.
So how can I help you? Hi, I'm calling to book a women's haircut for a client. I'm looking for something on May 3rd. Sure, give me 1 second. Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Sure, what time are you looking for around? At 12 p.m. We do not have a 12 p.m. available. The closest we have to that is a 1:15. Do you have anything between 10 a.m. and 12 p.m.? Depending on what service she would like. What service is she looking for? Just a woman's haircut for now. Okay, we have a 10 o'clock. 10 a.m. is fine. Okay, what's her first name? The first name is Lisa. Okay, perfect. So I will see Lisa at 10 o'clock on May 3rd. Okay, great. Thanks. Great. Have a great day. Bye.
So this is a computer, an artificially intelligent computer talking to a human. This is happening already in our lifetime. And so much has happened in your lifetime, you just don't notice because of the pace at which things are happening. Any single word on this slide is something that if you had told your grandmother 40 years ago was going to be something that you interact with on a daily basis, she would have thought of you as mad, right? And the idea is it all happened. We're talking to computers. We have computers in every part of our life. We connect to billions of people around the world through social networks. We have all of this technology in our life, and we just take it for granted. We somehow don't notice how fast things are going. Now, if you really have ever used the mainframe, you start to realize how fast things are going. Because honestly, to program a mainframe was humiliating, right? Compared to the technology we have today, it was truly a humiliating task. Now that speed where things are happening at is because of 3 charts. And I really need you to grasp the 3 charts. 2 of them you know really well, but you don't think about them often enough. And one is truly the key one, which I'll try to share with you today. The first one is known as the product adoption curve. This is the curve, the S curve. Remember those, when a product is launched, people start to adopt it a little bit quicker, more and more and more, and then it saturates and you need another product. These are some of the common technologies we used in our lifetime. I'm trying to compare here any 2 of them. This is TV and the internet, right? It took TV around 100 years to reach the kind of penetration, product adoption that the internet reached in 15 years. Sometimes I joke and I say it took Jesus or Prophet Muhammad around more than 1,000 years to reach what Larry Page achieved in 15, right? What Mark Zuckerberg achieved in 7, right? And so on. Things are moving faster and faster. To get to 1 billion users today, it's honestly not unlikely that a product launched in 2018 might actually reach 1 billion users in 2019. This is the pace at which products are being adopted, which is something that we need to keep in our mind in terms of, in an industry like automobile, where products are designed every 7 years. How good is that for this world? And if you look at airlines, where products are designed every 25 years, seriously, 25 years will there be an airline to start with, right? And so why is technology moving so fast is another interesting curve. I use two analogies. One of them, something very dear to my heart. I think that the ingenuity of humanity really showed in the production of the automobile, the internal combustion engine, and all of the technologies around it, right? So I'm going to use a few examples of that. I love Audi. Audi also, or the VW group, happens to have the biggest commercial engine in a vehicle. So look at their history. This is the Auto Union. It was in, it ended in the 60s. The production was between the 50s and the 60s. The Auto Union had 44 horsepower in it. Then the Quattro, which was the legendary sort of quintessential Audi. Between 1980 and 1991, it produced 217 horsepower at most. The R8 today produces somewhere around 560 if you want, so now we're at 10x the Auto Union or a little more. And the top is the Bugatti Veyron at around 1,200 horsepower. Now that's quite impressive. That's almost 25x in 50 years, right? Very, very impressive. But look at the internal compute engine, the microprocessor. So if you take anyone who has ever used a Sinclair or an IBM-compatible computer or an AT or an XT or a Pentium and so on, you remember when it moved from 8 to 16 or from, when we moved to 64 bits or whatever, the incredible growth that we had. I actually gave up on trying to measure how far the compute power is going, because if you really look at it, we're in the million X. Several million X performance of the very first IBM-compatible computer I owned, right? I remember vividly, I worked at IBM at the time, and I sold a 40 megabyte hard drive to the American University in Cairo for $80,000, right? This is one picture or one video that you can have on your phone today. And that was at an 80% discount. Imagine, right? Now, this is how far we've come. Now, everyone knows this chart. This is called the Moore's Law, or the technology acceleration curve. You can rest assured that every technology that we're going to build, because of the way economies of scale happen, is going to accelerate, double in performance every 18 months, hopefully for the same price. And people will say, the limits on the microprocessor are starting to shrink, and maybe we cannot do that anymore. But look at how we're doing cloud computing and how we're expanding into multiple systems, and maybe quantum computing and all of the other stuff. So there is definitely a continuation of that growth. Now, the beauty of the technology acceleration curve is that when you moved from let's say 32 megahertz to 64 megahertz, you added 32. But now, if you double again, you're adding billions of processing power every year, right? Whatever measure you use for processing power. Now, the other reason why this is very different than the automobile industry is that you can create an internal combustion engine with a lot of horsepower. What can you do with it? Put it in a car and move things around. But what can you do with an increased compute power? You develop more compute power. And the world we live in, especially the world of the internet, has changed so drastically just in the last 15 to 20 years. And the main three differences are those. Today, everyone can innovate. Every single one of you can innovate. The reason is very straightforward. There is a democracy of information that I did not grow up to know. When I was studying civil engineering in university, I didn't do very well in the theory of hydraulics. I look back at this now and I laugh because hydraulics were very simple. But the problem is we had one book in the library of the university. I had to take an appointment with that book, I swear. They would say, okay, come back on Wednesday at 11 a.m. And at 10 a.m. I'm standing there waiting for my book, right? That was how difficult it is. Look at the internet today. We take it completely for granted. But a student in Africa has the same access to what students in MIT will have, right? That kind of democracy expands into tools, because if you have a good idea, you can go to Amazon web services, or you can go to Google Cloud or wherever, and you can literally use the compute engines, the compute power, the software that they have to build your own things for $10 a month. This is unbelievable compared to someone like me who never had access to computers growing up. More importantly, if you actually build it, you have incredible access to the whole world. Anything you build today, you can sell to anybody, anywhere in the world. You really don't have to be Walmart to sell something anywhere in the world, right? And between those three, innovation in the last 5 to 7 years has just gone through the roof. through the roof. Everyone is building stuff, and I'll show you some of the technologies that are happening that are completely going to redefine your life in the next 3 to 4 years. One more curve before we go there, and that's actually the one that you only get to know if you're inside an innovation engine. So I went to Google from Microsoft around 12 years ago, and you will not believe what it's like to live inside the internet. And Microsoft, by the way, was an incredible innovation company, right? But then I go to Google, and everything is on the internet is in billions, and the way things are happening is just unbelievable. It was at the edge of the point where we were breaking out. And that was the chart that was really defining everything. It's called the technology development curve. So I'm going to use an example from AI. AI seems to be quite trendy nowadays. Everyone's talking about AI. But AI is nothing new. I don't know if you know that. The chart, by the way, the curve starts with momentum, and then it goes into acceleration after a very sharp point. There is a point at which things really break out. The interesting thing, however, is that this curve looks this way. It takes so long for us to reach that breakout point or breakthrough point that most people don't actually realize when it happens. So AI started in 1954, was the Dartmouth experiment, for those of you who have been following. As a young developer, it was my dream to build AI. Even when I had a Sinclair computer or a Commodore 64 or whatever that is, I dreamt I could build AI on this, right? It started then, but then we failed. By the first oil crisis in 1973, the economics of AI were not working anymore. We hadn't developed anything at all, and so we dropped it. It was called the first AI winter, right? Japan started again to create a hype around AI in the 80s, so everyone jumped in. Another economic crisis, 1987, the second AI winter. Only by the turn of this century, close to 50 years later, did we start to actually find the first AI summer. And it started to break through, one discovery after the next, right? We went from deep learning to unprompted to commercial systems, and AI is absolutely real today. I showed you an example at the beginning, and there are so many, countless examples if you get to know what's going on. Now, the idea here is you take this technology development trend, you take the technology acceleration curve, and you put them together, and you start to see things like this. 5 technologies that I believe will reshape your life. One is robotics, not robotics as you saw in science fiction movies. Robots are machines that are capable of making intelligent decisions, and we have so many of them. Machine learning, by all means, those machines are going to be more intelligent than you and I in your lifetime. Probably by the year 2029 is the maximum prediction we have. Life sciences is incredible. It's completely hyped yet, but we believe that within the next 30 years or so, we would be able to expand your life expectancy by 1 year every year, which in mathematics would tell you could live forever, so you better start working out, right? Seriously. And the life sciences truly is the overlap between computer science and biology, and we are much more of a machine than you think we are. Wearables is just the tip of this. It's the DOS of life sciences, but all of the understanding of the DNA and so on is just breaking out by all means. Virtual and augmented reality, do I need to tell you anything after Ashok showed you his technology? This is, it seems a little disappointing because the product adoption curve has not started yet. The headsets were a little too bulky to be in gaming and so on. But trust me, this is going to be the absolute way you live in your lifetime and mine. And of course, the one that is rarely spoken about, but you have to pay incredible attention to, is the blockchain and how we're going to disintermediate every middleman by building trust directly between people without middlemen in the way. By a very simple technology, but it's going to reshape everything. And I can talk to you about each of those offline if you want to. But put some of those together, and you start to get something amazing. You start to get a technology acceleration curve following a technology development curve, and you get into science fiction. And to entertain you a little, I need you to play with me here. I'm going to show you some clips from science fiction movies, and with a show of hand, tell me if you believe this will happen in your lifetime or not. So this is Star Trek. Can you see the flip phone? Remember the flip phone and the tablet? This already happened, right? We used to call it science fiction in the 60s, but it already happened. Now let's play on that game a little more. This is Minority Report, 2004. At the time I was in Microsoft, and you know, Tom Cruise started to wave at his computer and turn things as the interface, and the computer responded. And I thought, man, that's cool. That's absolute science fiction, 2004. How many of you think this will happen in our lifetime and mine, your lifetime? Of course. So 2009, it was on every Xbox, it was on every PlayStation, it was on every Nintendo, right? That is not a technology anymore. We just take it for granted. How about this one? This is 2007, iRobot. This is a self-driving vehicle. Did I give that away? Of course. Now let's push it a little. How about this one? Again, Star Trek?
I believe it's a molecular synthesizer of some kind. Similar to a protein resequencer, but far more advanced. To water. Cold.
Something out of nothing. A molecular synthesizer, they called it. Do you think this will happen in your lifetime and mine? I love the brave ones. Okay. Yeah, this already happened. I apologize to tell you that. It's called 3D printing. And we print so many things, you'll be blown away. We print things from chocolate, all the way to concrete, all the way to multiple materials, all the way to tools on the space station. We haven't printed a glass full of water yet, but we have printed live kidneys that you can transplant in a guinea pig, right? So it happened, and it's going to improve. It's just now the DOS version of it. In your lifetime and mine, we'll be able to print everything, I believe. How about this one? This is called telepathy. Anyone believes we're going to have telepathy? I mean, it's a trick question. You should start raising your hand even if your heart is telling you no. Okay? So, no? All right. My wonderful daughter, she's here in the audience today. She lives in Canada. I travel the world constantly. I use a tiny screen and an application called WhatsApp to read what's in her mind, and she reads what's in my mind without opening our words, our mouth, right? And of course, as you can imagine, in no time at all, we will get rid of the screen and the keyboard. As a matter of fact, MIT has launched, made a press release a few weeks ago of a headset that reads your brainwave. I mean, it's, again, experimental, but it's not going to be impossible for you and I to telepathically communicate. Let's push it even further. How about teleportation? Because honestly, it would have been wonderful to have this meeting with you without having to fly around the world. Do you think I can get into a machine and zoop, be in front of you? Ah, come on, raise your hands, people. I mean, you just saw a shock. With virtual reality, of course. Of course, with virtual reality, I could be here in no time at all. With the proper headset, you could see me even better than the real world, right? You could probably zoom on me, read the silly stuff I have on my t-shirt. You can do anything that you like if you want with teleportation on virtual reality. And of course, if you take that a bit further in virtual reality, I could probably transport to an avatar world or to New York in 1920, right? Because I have actually seen and witnessed demos of those things where you actually teleport into a world that doesn't even exist. What I'm trying to tell you here is that the biggest barrier to innovation is the mindset. I've showed you examples of things that exist today, and you still said, no, it's not possible. Okay? And that reminds me of my fellow Egyptians, my fellow pharaoh, who built the pyramids by killing slaves to force them to carry rocks up a very steep building, right? If I had told him, hey, by the way, just wait a few years, I'm going to give you rocks in a bag, which is an interesting technology, just add water up there and it will be fine, he would have said impossible. If I had told him, stop adding horses to your cart because you're going to have 1,200 horsepower in a machine, he would have said impossible. And you really need to start asking yourself, am I the barrier to innovation, right? And we started to do this at Google X, which was one of the most incredible experiences of my lifetime. In Google X, we started to define something we call radical innovation. And again, I use cars. The car industry had accidents in the Model T at 30 kilometers an hour that killed people, right? And they invested so heavily in making cars safer. So they started with something called crash worthiness, so that when you have a crash, the crumble zones and the airbags and what have you would keep you safe. Excellent. Then they went into crash avoidance, which basically said, let's add ABS and xenon lights or whatever those are, so that you don't even have the crash to start with. Brilliant. Incremental innovations that made our life better. Then they started to go into driver assistant. If you go a little bit out of the lane, the car will say, hey, you got out of the lane, just come back in. Or if a car is near in your blind spot, it will tell you, hey, by the way, just avoid turning to the left. But then all of these continue to live with the same problem that's causing accidents to start with, which is you and I. You put makeup while you're driving, or I text while I drive. I don't mean you specifically, but you know what I mean, right? And 93% of accidents on the road today, more than 1 million people a year die because of human error. If you really wanted to reinvent the car, you would remove the driver. Now, when we started to do that at Google more than 9 years ago, it was impossible. You couldn't believe that this was possible. But you know how? You know what? Millions and millions of miles have been driven driverlessly by Google and by others. Now that we call a moonshot. And a moonshot is a mode of operation or a mode of innovation that I believe is a new way of doing things. In the past, it was one person, Edison, then it became an organization, then it became the VC and the startup industry to innovate. But there are big problems in our world that need innovation that is driven by the problem and backed up by the resources that can change our world positively. So a moonshot is something when you commit to a problem and solve it in a very, very radical way. If you want to do moonshot innovation, there are 3 things you need to do that are honestly things you can do before you leave this room, right? The first one is assume that everything's possible because I can guarantee you everything is. I do not think of any problem that I have seen in the science fiction world in my young years that cannot be solved in some form of creative way today. Then the second thing is commit to the problem. Capitalism, with all due respect, which has pushed us this far, has constantly made us commit to the monies. How much am I going to make out of this? But that's not how innovation started. When Edison or whoever invented the first whatever, they were not thinking of a business plan first. They were thinking of how can this make the world better, right? They didn't have a product in mind or a technology that they committed to. They didn't have a business plan in place, right? And that is what we started to miss. Larry Page, of the million things he taught us, this was one of the things that I kept dear to my heart. He called it the toothbrush test. If you managed to solve a problem that affects the life of 1 billion people or more so well that they could use it, that they started to rely on it twice a day, you will make a lot of money. And that was the story of Google, right? You started to use Google twice a day, 4 times a day, 5 times a day, and then we ended up making a ton of money. So I say we, but because I will always feel it's we, right? So the question you're really trying to answer here is, what would you build if you were truly committed to making the world a better place? Believing inside you that if you actually do make the world a better place, you will make a lot of money. The third is, you do not settle for incremental innovation anymore. I work a lot with Korea, which is an incredible nation that is so innovative, but they still build LED TVs that are thinner, right? This is what they direct their innovation to. They innovate in terms of evolution of what they have. Revolution is what you're looking for. A driverless car is not a car. We call it a car, but it isn't really, right? And the way you start to think about those things is actually very different when you start to tell yourself, I am going to reject any incremental innovation. 10% is not good enough, 20% is not good enough, 100% is not good enough. At Google X, we used to call 10X. The solution needs to resolve the problem at a magnitude that's 10x improvement of what we have today. So I want to remind you that you and everyone can do this. By the way, not only in technology, you can be in hospitality and innovate to solve a problem that affects the life of billions of people. I'm working with an airline because I travel all the time, and it sucks. It's a horrible experience, right? And we're working on innovation that has very little technology in it so that my trip becomes better. I'm working with a Wall Street tycoon to reinvent the finance industry so that we can actually build things that are good for our world and very, very profitable. I'm working with a manufacturing a client. I'm working on happiness. as a way of making of a moonshot that makes our world a better place. So whatever it is that you're doing, it's still a mindset. If you change your mindset, there are techniques that can make that happen. I'm going to have to skip this because, as you can see, it's a very, very complex slide. But it isn't really. It's just you have to build a factory to innovate and not expect that innovation is just going to happen. Right? It has to happen deliberately. I've studied, of course, I've helped build the Google X model, but I've studied all of the others, and I can share this openly with anyone who's interested in this. Pictures? Done. All right. Which leaves me with one question, because I know it's in your hearts and minds. Huh? With all that is happening here, Mo, I'm scared. This actually is quite worrying. What's going to happen here? What's going to happen to my job? What's going to happen to our world? Are robots going to take my job? And is there going to be a Terminator movie, or all of the science fiction horror that we see growing up? Is that going to happen? Are they going to take over? Is it going to be Mad Max? Good questions. And I will tell you openly, yeah, it's possible, unless you start to step up and do your role. Okay? And for that, I basically say that our world has changed so drastically in the last 15, 20 years that if you really look at things like the election of Donald Trump, like the Arab Spring, like all of the things that are happening around our world, like Brexit and so on, you will realize that for the first time in our lifetime, we actually hold the power to change everything. And so I actually decided around 8 to 9 months ago to leave Google to focus on a moonshot that is my personal moonshot. And that moonshot comes from something that I call, with great power comes great responsibility. Now, for the first time in the history of humanity, you have more power than anyone that is in power. Now, how do you use that power to fix our world? I'll show you a video, and with that we will close.
A moonshot is committing to solving a specific problem before you really know that you can actually make it happen. My name is Mo. Hi, I'm Mo. Google X is the moonshot factory, the innovation factory of Google. They invent things like self-driving cars and do a lot of work on robotics. Imagine if you go to your grandfather, grandmother, and ask them if anything that you've interacted with today was something they expected when they were your age. Everything we've seen in science fiction is now science fact.
You have your choice of two routes.
Now you have to start thinking about what's going to be science fiction for you when you are their age. Everything that you've ever imagined or have ever seen in a science fiction movie is going to happen in your lifetime and mine. Artificial intelligence is real, it's here. Those machines are developing partial intelligence that way surpasses our human intelligence. They see better, they hear better, and sometimes they even reason better. Over the next 15 to 20 years, this is going to develop a computer that is much smarter than all of us. We call that moment singularity. Singularity is a moment beyond which we can no longer see. We can no longer forecast. The development of our world beyond the moment where machines are smarter than we are is highly unpredictable. Everything is possible. Those machines can solve every problem that we've ever faced, or they can actually decide that we're the problem and get rid of us. How do we contain them? We don't contain them at all. The best way to raise wonderful children is to be a wonderful parent. It's not the inventor of the technology that's going to set the tone going forward. It's the technology itself that's going to use the knowledge, the values that we communicate to it, to develop its own intelligence. How are those machines learning? They're looking at all of the knowledge that's out there in the world, and they're building patterns from that. Just like an 18-month-old infant. Remember when we gave our children those little boxes that had different patterns and shapes? That's the way computers are learning today. We basically write algorithms that allow computers to understand those patterns, and then we get them to try and try and try, and through pattern recognition, through billions of observations, they learn. They're learning by observing. And what are they observing? They're observing a world that's full of greed, disregard for other species, violence, ego, showing off. The only way to get those machines to be not only intelligent, but to also have the right value set is that we start to portray that right value set today. The problem is unhappiness. Unhappiness has never been higher. 1 of every 4 people in the world today is clinically depressed. Teen suicide is at an all-time high. Humanity has never had a better life. Our life expectancy is better, our quality of life is better, but we've never been unhappier. My personal moonshot is about making 1 billion people happy. Billion with a B. Your happiness is your priority. Invest in your happiness and then find the compassion in you to share it. Pay it forward, tell others. If every one of us tells 2 people who tell 2 people who tell 2 people, that is the absolute design of an exponential function. I'm going to tell the world that my priority is to be happy, and I'm going to have the compassion inside me to make others happy. This 1 billion happy mission is at the most pivotal time of humanity because those machines are going to be smarter than we are, and they will be absorbing what we are putting out there. I'm leaving Google and I'm committing the rest of my life and my resources to this mission. If there are 1 billion of us telling the world that there is a better way to live, we will change the world forever.
Thank you. So I'll have a breakout session that will take only some of us at 11:10 to discuss this a lot further. This is based on a model of my book, Solve for Happy, that actually has been an international bestseller and delivers happiness predictably if you want to. But forget all of that. Connect with me. I'm Mo Gawdat, one word, on LinkedIn, or go to OneBillionHappy.org and join. Trust me, our world needs so much innovation, not the least of which is that we start to realize what really matters. Happiness and compassion is what really matters. So for that, thank you very much, and I hope you join me. Thank you.